They say some traditions are written in blood, but on the edges of the Orion Nebula, I learned that some are written in grease and carbon scoring. It was 0200 hours aboard the Deep Watch Vanguard, a joint species monitoring station that smelled eternally of recycled oxygen and ozone. Chief Engineer Silas Thorne, that's me, was a man of simple needs and one obsessive habit. I couldn't stand a mess. It was a human quirk that most of the alien crew found baffling, if not outright clinical. But tonight, that quirk was about to trigger a diplomatic incident that could restart a 100-year war. I walked into the secondary maintenance bay, expecting the usual silence of the graveyard shift. Instead, I found a pile of wreckage that looked like it had been dragged through a supernova. It was a suit of ceremonial Vor'shai plate, massive, jagged, and coated in a layer of grime, so thick it looked like it had its own ecosystem. To anyone else, it was junk. To me, it was an insult to the engineering profession. I didn't stop to think. I didn't check the manifest. I just grabbed my ultrasonic pulse cleaner and a vat of industrial-grade solvent. I thought I was being a good neighbor. I thought I was doing someone a favor. As the first layer of blackened soot melted away under my touch, revealing the shimmering, iridescent violet alloy underneath, I had no idea I was currently committing what the Vor'shai considered a shattering of the soul. Hold on before we get into the real stuff. I want to know. What are you doing at this exact moment while hearing my voice? I love seeing your answers down below in the comments. The metal hummed under my hands. It wasn't just metal. It was bioreactive. As I scrubbed, the suit began to glow, responding to the heat of the friction. I spent hours on it. I polished the dents until they vanished into a mirror finish. I removed the deep gouges and the ancient, dried stains of what I assumed was old hydraulic fluid. By the time the artificial sun cycle began to bleed through the viewports, the armor didn't look like a relic anymore. It looked brand new. It looked like it had just stepped off a divine forge. That's when the heavy hydraulic doors hissed open. Commander Val, the Vor'shai's most feared warrior and the station's liaison, stood in the doorway. She wasn't wearing her usual cold, calculated expression. When her eyes fell on the gleaming armor on my workbench, her 4 pupils dilated until her eyes were solid voids of black. She didn't move. She didn't breathe. The air in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. She took one trembling step forward, her hand reaching out toward the polished chest plate, her fingers shaking with a violent intensity I'd never seen from her kind. She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a predator look truly terrified. "Human," she whispered, her voice cracking like breaking glass. "Do you have any idea what you have just done?" My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked at the rag in my hand, then back at the sparkling armor. I had only wanted to help. But the look in her eyes told me that help was the last thing I had actually provided. The silence that followed wasn't just awkward. It was the sound of a death sentence being written in the air between us. Val's hand hovered just inches from the breastplate, trembling so violently I thought she might collapse. The Vor'shai are a race built for war, tall, lean, and covered in natural chitinous ridges that mirror their biological armor. They don't show fear. They don't show weakness. But looking at her now, it was as if I'd stripped her naked in the middle of a vacuum. I just thought it needed a bit of a polish, Commander," I stuttered. The industrial degrees are still wet on my gloves. It was covered in carbon scoring. I used the ultrasonic bath and a bit of elbow grease. It's as good as new, right? She didn't answer. Instead, she let out a low, mournful keen that vibrated in the very marrow of my bones. She sank to her knees, her eyes fixed on the spot where a massive, jagged scar had once marred the center of the chest piece. I had worked for 3 hours specifically to buff that scar out. It had been deep, ugly, and blackened by some kind of plasma discharge. Now it was a smooth, iridescent purple, reflecting the flickering overhead lights of the maintenance bay. "As good as new," she repeated, her voice a hollow shell of its usual commanding bark. "You human. You blind, efficient monster. You didn't just clean it. You erased it." I felt a cold sweat prickle at the back of my neck. In my world, erasing a mess was the highest compliment you could give a technician. In her world, I was starting to realize I had just committed a form of historical revisionism that bordered on the sacrilegious. She finally looked up at me, and her eyes were swimming. Not with the tears of a victim, but with the profound shock of someone who had just witnessed a miracle or a murder. She didn't seem to know which. "That scar," she whispered, pointing to the now flawless metal. "That was the mark of the shattered moon. It was earned by my great matriarch when she stood alone against the swarm. Every dent you polished away was a victory. Every stain you scrubbed was the blood of an ancestor who died so that I might breathe." My stomach did a slow, nauseating flip. I looked at the pile of gray, sludge-filled rags in the corner. That dirt I'd been so proud of removing. It wasn't just grime. It was the physical manifestation of her family's entire military history. I hadn't cleaned a suit of armor. I had bleached a war memorial. "I'm so sorry, Vol," I breathed, taking a step back. "I didn't know. I thought, on Earth, we keep our gear pristine. It's a sign of respect for the equipment. Respect for the machine, perhaps," she said, finally standing up, her height looming over me. She looked down at the armor, then back at me, her expression shifting from grief to something much more complex, something dangerous. "But for the Vor'shai, the armor is the soul. To clean it is to say that the past no longer matters. To make it new is to declare that the warrior has been reborn." She reached out and finally touched the metal. As soon as her skin made contact with the bioreactive alloy I'd polished, a pulse of pure, white light rippled through the suit. It didn't just hum this time, it sang. A high-pitched, harmonic frequency that began to resonate with the station's own power core. The lights in the bay flickered and died, leaving us in the pulsing violet glow of the armor. Val's breath hitched. She looked at her hands, then at the suit, and then she leaned in close to my face, her breath smelling of ozone and ancient spices. "Silas Thorne," she whispered, her voice dropping to a dangerous, intimate level. "Do you have any idea what it means when a male of another species rebirths, the soul plate of a Vor'shai noble? Do you have any idea what the law of the unmarked says about the man who wipes away the blood of 1,000 years?" I opened my mouth to apologize again, but the words died in my throat. Outside in the hallway, I heard the heavy, rhythmic thud of the Vor'shai High Guard, the Empress's personal security detail. They weren't just passing by. They were stopping at our door. Vol grabbed my collar and yanked me toward her. "Listen to me very carefully, human. If they see what you've done, there are only 2 paths they will allow. And I don't think you're going to like the first one." The thud of the High Guard's boots grew louder, a rhythmic drumming that seemed to sync with the frantic beating of my heart. Vol didn't let go of my collar. Her grip was like a vice, her eyes searching mine for some sign of comprehension that I simply didn't have. To me, I was a mechanic who had overstepped. To her, I was a man standing on the edge of a cultural supernova. "The first path," she hissed, her voice dropping to a jagged whisper as the shadows of the guards flickered under the doorframe, "is execution. To erase a Vor'shai's history is considered a soul theft. They will view this polished plate as a corpse, and you as the one who hollowed it out." I swallowed hard, the metallic taste of fear pooling under my tongue. "And the second path?" I managed to wheeze out. Vol's gaze shifted to the armor. The violet glow was intensifying, the suit vibrating with a low-frequency hum that made my teeth ache. "The second path is the law of the unmarked. It is a legend, a myth we tell our hatchlings. It says that if a being from beyond the stars can wipe away the blood of 1,000 years without shattering the metal, they are not a thief. They are a shaper." The heavy hydraulic locks on the bay door groaned. The High Guard were inputting the override codes. I had maybe 5 seconds left of being a simple engineer before I became either a martyr or a messiah. "A shaper?" I whispered. "Vol, I just used a grade 4 solvent and a buffer." "Silence," she commanded, but her eyes weren't angry anymore. They were wide with a terrifying kind of awe. The bioalloy, it shouldn't have accepted your touch. It should have rejected the solvent. It should have oxidized and crumbled into dust if an unworthy hand sought to change it. But look at it, Silas. It's not just clean. It's singing. She was right. The harmonic resonance was filling the room now, a beautiful haunting melody that sounded like 1,000 voices humming in perfect unison. It wasn't the sound of a machine. It was the sound of a choir. The doors slid open with a violent hiss. 6 high guards, towering giants clad in obsidian black plate that looked like jagged obsidian, stormed into the room. Their plasma lances were leveled, the tips glowing with a lethal blue light. In the center of the formation stood High Inquisitor Krell, a Vor'shai so old his skin looked like weathered stone. He stopped dead the moment the light of the polished armor hit his eyes. The silence that followed was absolute. The guards froze. Krell's primary eyes went wide, and his secondary set of eyes blinked in rapid, stunned succession. He looked at the gleaming, mirror-finish armor, then at the pile of dirty rags on the floor, and finally at me, a sweaty human in a stained jumpsuit holding a polishing cloth. "Commander Val," Krell said, his voice a deep, tectonic rumble that shook the floor plates. "Explain why the relic of the third moon looks as though it has just been birthed from the Great Forge. Explain why the scars of our bloodline have vanished." Val didn't flinch. She stepped beside me, her shoulder brushing mine, and she did something I never expected. She bowed. Not to the Inquisitor, but to the armor. "It was not an act of desecration, Inquisitor," she declared, her voice ringing with a newfound iron. "The human, Silas Thorne, has performed the rite of the clear mirror. He has looked into our past and deemed us ready for a future without stains." Krell took a slow, heavy step toward me. He raised his plasma lance, the tip inches from my throat. I could feel the heat radiating off the weapon, smelling the ionized air. A human? He sneered. A creature of soft skin and short lives? "You claim he is a shaper?" "The metal does not lie, Inquisitor," Val countered, pointing at the glowing suit. "If he were a desecrator, the plate would be black. But look, it is violet. The color of the Empress herself." Krell leaned in, his face inches from mine. I could see the tiny scales around his eyes. "Tell me, human," he growled. "When you touched the blood plate, what did you hear? Did you hear the screams of the fallen? Or did you hear the silence of the void?" I looked at Vile, then at the shimmering metal. I didn't want to lie, but I didn't want to die either. I started, my voice trembling. I heard a heartbeat. I thought it was the machine's pulse, but it felt like it was waiting for someone to wake it up. The Inquisitor's eyes narrowed. He lowered his lance, but the tension didn't leave the room. It just transformed into something heavier. "If you are a shaper, then the prophecy of the polished soul has begun," he whispered, sounding more afraid than Val had been. "But if you have simply tricked the metal, then your entire species will pay for this insult." He turned to his guards. "Take them, not to the brig. Take them to the inner sanctum. The Empress must see this. If a human has cleaned the uncleanable, then the Great War is over. Or it is about to get much, much worse." The inner sanctum of the Deep Watch Vanguard wasn't a room. It was a cathedral built of dark matter and ancient memory. I was marched through corridors lined with floating holographic tapestries, each depicting 1,000 years of Vor'shai conquest. My boots, heavy and rubber-soled, made a dull thud-thud that felt like a sacrilege against the silent crystal floors. Beside me, Val walked with a stiffness that told me she was either preparing for a coronation or an execution. "Val," I whispered, the sound echoing too loudly in the vaulted hall. "What exactly is the prophecy of the polished soul? Because back on Earth, we just call this maintenance." She didn't look at me. Her gaze was fixed forward, her jaw set tight. "On Earth, you see a tool and you see its function. We see a tool and we see the spirit of the one who wielded it. For 5 centuries, that armor, the relic of the third moon, has been the physical record of our pain. It was stained with the soot of burned worlds and the blood of our greatest leaders. To us, Those stains were our identity. They proved we survived. I looked down at my hands. They were still stained with the purple-tinted residue of the bioalloy. And by cleaning it, I took that away? No, she said, finally glancing at me with an expression that sent a shiver down my spine. By cleaning it and not being vaporized by the suit's security feedback, you proved that the pain is no longer necessary. You told the metal and the universe that the Vor'shai are finished with mourning. You declared us ready. Ready for what? I didn't have time to ask. The massive obsidian doors at the end of the hall spiraled open like the iris of a giant eye. Inside, the room was bathed in a haunting, bioluminescent violet light. High above, on a throne carved from a single fallen star, sat Empress Islora. She was taller than any Vor'shai I had seen, her skin shimmering with the same iridescent hue as the armor I had just polished. She didn't look old. She looked eternal. The High Guard forced me to my knees. The Empress didn't speak. She didn't have to. The psychic weight of her presence hit me like a physical wall. She rose from her throne, her movements fluid and predatory, and descended the stairs until she stood directly over the floating pedestal where they had placed the cleaned armor. She reached out a long, slender finger and traced the line where the great scar used to be. The metal purred. It didn't just glow. It pulsed with a warmth that filled the entire chamber. Xylera turned her gaze toward me. Her eyes were 4 pools of liquid silver, reflecting my own terrified face back at me. "Human," she said. Her voice wasn't a sound. It was a vibration in my skull. My ancestors died to put those marks on this plate. My father bled to keep them there, and you, a creature who measures his life in decades, you thought it was dirty? I couldn't breathe. The air felt heavy, saturated with her power. I thought it deserved to shine, Your Majesty, I managed to gasp. I thought the person wearing it should see their own reflection, not just the shadows of people who aren't here anymore. The entire room went silent. I saw Inquisitor Krell reach for his blade. I saw Vial close her eyes, as if waiting for the blow. Then, the Empress did something that made the High Guard gasp. She laughed. A sharp, melodic sound that broke the tension like a thunderclap. "The shadows of people who aren't here anymore," she repeated, her silver eyes shimmering. She looked back at the armor, then at me. "Do you know what this means, Silas Thorne? Do you know what happens to a culture of warriors when their greatest symbol of war is suddenly made pristine?" She stepped closer, leaning down until I could smell the scent of cold space and starlight. "It means the debt is paid. And you, human, you are now the one who holds the receipt." The Empress's words hung in the air like a localized gravity well. The debt is paid. To a human, that sounds like a good thing, like finally clearing a credit card balance. But in a room full of 4-eyed alien warriors who lived and breathed for the glory of the Kori of the Scar, those words felt more like a galactic reset button. "Your Majesty," Inquisitor Krell stepped forward, his voice a low, threatening rumble. "The human's insolence cannot be rebranded as prophecy." He used solvents. He used primitive earth chemical compounds to dissolve the sacred crust. To suggest this satisfies the blood debt of the third moon is heresy. Xylera didn't even look at him. She kept her silver eyes locked on mine. "Is it, Krell? Or is it that you are afraid of a world where we aren't defined by how much we've bled?" She reached out and brushed the polished chest plate again. The violet light flared, illuminating the entire sanctum. "The alloy has accepted him." If this were a chemical trick, the bioreactive core would have blackened the metal and melted the human's hands to the bone. Instead, she paused, and I saw a flicker of something human in her sadness. "Instead," she whispered, "it is singing a song of peace I haven't heard since I was a hatchling." Val, still kneeling beside me, let out a breath she'd been holding for what felt like an eternity. But I wasn't relaxed. Not even close. Because if the Empress was right, and I had just paid a debt for an entire species, the receipt she mentioned wasn't going to be a piece of paper. It was going to be a target on my back. "The law of the unmarked is clear," Xylera announced. her voice booming through the telepathic link of every Vor'shai on the station. The shaper who clears the mirror plate becomes the ward of the crown. Silas Thorne is no longer a mere engineer of the Deep Watch Vanguard. He's the architect of the new era. I felt the blood drain from my face. Wait, architect? Your Majesty, I'm just a guy who fixes atmospheric scrubbers. I'm really good with a wrench, but I don't know anything about eras. The Empress leaned in, her silver eyes narrowing. You don't understand, human. By cleaning the relic, you have signaled to our enemies, the Swarm, the Culturi, the Voidwalkers, that the Vor'shai have washed the blood from our hands. They will see this as a sign of weakness. They will think our fire has gone out. She grabbed my chin with a cold, metallic strength. They will come for us. And because you are the one who signaled our peace, you are the one who must prove that a clean blade is sharper than a rusted one. Suddenly, the station's red alert sirens began to scream. The violet light of the inner sanctum was replaced by the harsh, rhythmic strobing of emergency beacons. Reporting, Krell barked into his comms link. A frantic voice crackled back through the speakers. Inquisitor. A Culturi splinter fleet just jumped into the sector. They're broadcasting on all frequencies. They say they felt the shattering of the scar. They're demanding the head of the one who desecrated the relic. Xylera looked at me, a grim, predatory smile spreading across her face. It seems your favors have a very short shelf life, Silas Thorne. The Culturi are here for their receipt. She turned to Vol. Equip him. If he is a shaper, let us see if he can shape the outcome of a massacre. Vol grabbed my arm and hoisted me up. Come, human. You wanted a clean workspace? You're about to see how messy a clean war can get. The sirens weren't just alarms. They were a death knell. The Deep Watch Vanguard groaned as the first Culturi kinetic slugs slammed into the outer hull, sending a shudder through the deck plates that I felt in my very marrow. Vol didn't hesitate. She dragged me through a series of pressurized bulkheads toward the high-security armory. Her stride so long I had to double-time it just to keep up. Vol, wait. I shouted over the screech of tearing metal. I'm a mechanic. I fix things that are already broken. I don't shape wars. I don't even like confrontation. She spun around, pinning me against a rack of pulse rifles. Her 4 pupils were pinpricks of obsidian. Listen to me, Silas. The Culturi are scavengers. They believe that the grime on our armor was a physical barrier, a layer of stagnant karma that protected us. By cleaning it, they think you've stripped our shields. They aren't just here to kill us. They're here to prove our gods are dead. She punched a code into a reinforced locker. The door hissed open, revealing a suit of human-sized tactical gear, but it wasn't standard Earth Alliance issue. It was woven with the same iridescent violet filaments as the Empress's relic. Put it on, she commanded. This is Vor'shai tech, I protested, staring at the shimmering weave. My biology will reject the interface. It'll fry my nervous system. Not yours, Vol said, her voice dropping to a haunting whisper. The armor sang for you, remember? It recognized something in your intent. Most species clean things to hide the truth. Humans, you clean things to find the potential underneath. The metal felt that. I climbed into the suit. The moment the seals locked around my neck, I didn't feel the crushing weight of metal. I felt a surge of clarity. It was like someone had plugged my brain directly into the station's sensory grid. I could feel the hull breaches. I could see the heat signatures of the Culturi boarding pods latching onto the secondary docking ring like leeches. But there was something else. A hum. A low, rhythmic vibration at the base of my skull that felt remarkably like a purr. The Culturi are inside, Vol growled, checking her sidearm. They're heading for the inner sanctum. They want to melt down the relic of the third moon in front of the Empress. If that happens, the Vor'shai spirit will break. We will become a race of slaves. I can't fight a boarding party with a polishing cloth, Vol. She handed me a heavy, specialized tool, a multi-phase plasma torch I recognized from the engineering bay, but it had been modified. The casing was etched with Vor'shai runes that glowed with a fierce, steady light. "You aren't fighting them as a soldier," she said, her eyes burning with a strange hope. "You're fighting them as a shaper. You stripped the past off our armor. Now, go strip the future away from theirs." The armory doors exploded inward. A squad of Kaltari spindly, multi-limbed horrors clad in jagged, rusted scrap metal scrambled over the debris. They moved with a twitchy, unnatural speed, their chittering voices sounding like dry leaves in a windstorm. The lead Kaltari pointed a jagged blade at me and let out a screech that translated through my suit's comms as, "The Eraser. Kill the one who steals the memories." I gripped the plasma torch. My HUD flickered to life, highlighting the structural weaknesses in the Kaltari's rusted armor. To anyone else they were armored monsters. To my shaper eyes, they were just walking piles of poorly maintained scrap. "You want to talk about memories?" I muttered, the violet light of my suit flaring to a blinding brilliance. "Let's see how you handle a fresh start." The lead Kaltari lunged, its jagged blade whistling through the air toward my throat. In any other suit, I would have been too slow. But the violet weave armor didn't just move with me, it anticipated me. I stepped aside, the movement as fluid as water, and I saw the Kaltari's armor in a way no soldier ever could. I didn't see defensive plates. I saw stress fractures, rusted rivets, and a catastrophic misalignment in its cooling vents. I didn't swing a fist. I jammed the nozzle of the multi-phase plasma torch into the gap between its shoulder and neck, the precise spot where the rust had thinned the metal to the width of a fingernail. "Ventilation's clogged," I grunted. I pulled the trigger. Instead of a messy explosion, the torch emitted a focused ultrasonic pulse of heat. The Kaltari's rusted plate didn't just break, it disintegrated. The structural integrity of its entire suit failed in a chain reaction, the metal crumbling into fine red dust. The creature shrieked, falling back, not wounded by the flame, but suddenly exposed, its protective shell gone. The other 4 Kaltari froze. To them, armor was a sacred, permanent thing. To see it turn to powder in a second was like seeing someone delete a mountain. He dissolves the strength." One chittered, recoiling. "The human is a void eater." "I'm a janitor," I corrected, my voice booming through the suit's external speakers with a metallic resonance. "And this room is filthy." Val didn't waste the opening. She moved like a blur of violet shadow, her twin blades finding the gaps I had created. She wasn't just fighting. She was dancing. For the first time, she wasn't weighed down by the honor of her old, heavy, blood-stained gear. She was light. She was fast. She was exactly what I had intended when I cleaned that first suit, renewed. Within seconds, the hallway was silent, save for the pile of rusted scrap and the panting of the defeated scavengers. "You did it," Val breathed, looking at the dust on the floor. "You didn't just defeat them, Silas. You unmade them. We need to get to the sanctum," I said. Checking my HUD, the station's power levels were fluctuating wildly. "The Kaltari aren't just here for the relic. Look at the energy readings. They're trying to sync their ships to the station's resonance. They want to use the relic's psychic frequency to broadcast a signal." "A signal for what?" Val asked. "A total wipe," I realized, my stomach dropping. They saw me clean the armor and realized the Vor'shai are vulnerable to a reset. They aren't trying to kill the Empress. They're trying to broadcast a frequency that will clean the minds of every Vor'shai in the sector, erasing your memories, your culture, everything. They want to turn your entire race into a blank slate they can rewrite. Val's face went pale. "A digital lobotomy on a galactic scale. Not if I can get to the main transmitter first," I said, starting to run. "They think I'm the eraser? Fine. I'm going to show them what happens when you try to scrub a soul that doesn't want to be cleaned." As we sprinted toward the central spire, the station shook again. This time, it wasn't a kinetic slug. It was a gravitational pull. The Kaltari harvester ship had latched onto the spire, and I could see the violet glow of the relic through the station's internal sensors. It was being fed into the transmitter. The Empress wasn't just losing her armor. She was about to become the battery for her own people's destruction. The central spire was a chaotic storm of violet lightning and jagged shadows. As we burst through the final security seal, the sight was enough to make my heart stop. The Empress was standing in the center of a swirling vortex of energy, her arms outstretched, her silver eyes glowing with a terrifying intensity. She wasn't a prisoner, she was the conduit. The Kaltari had hooked their rusted parasitic cables directly into the relic of the third moon, which was now hovering above her, vibrating so hard it looked like it was blurring out of existence. High Inquisitor Krell was on the floor, his obsidian armor cracked and smoking. Standing over him was the Kaltari warlord, a hulking mass of scavenged parts and twitching limbs. The warlord turned to me, his vocal synthesizer screeching with a sound like grinding tectonic plates. "The Shaper arrives," the warlord mocked, the cables connected to his own back, pulsing with stolen violet energy. "You cleaned the vessel, human. You prepared the canvas. Now we shall paint the end of the Vor'shai upon it. When this signal fires, they will forget the names of their ancestors. They will forget the weight of their sins. They will be perfect, empty shells for us to fill. Silas." Vol screamed, lunging toward the warlord, but a pulse of pure static threw her back against the bulkhead. I looked at the Empress. She was fading. The iridescent glow I had worked so hard to polish was being drained, turned into a weapon of mass amnesia. The suit I was wearing began to scream, high-pitched mourning frequency that vibrated in my teeth. It was the same song the armor had sung in the bay, but now it was a dirge. I realized then that the Kaltari were right about one thing. I had created a blank slate, but they were wrong about what it was for. You think you can just delete 1,000 years of history because the metal is clean? I shouted, stepping into the storm of energy. The radiation alarms in my helmet were going insane, flashing red warnings across my vision. You think the soul is just the dirt on the surface? I didn't use the plasma torch this time. I threw it aside. I reached out with my gloved hands and grabbed the parasitic Kaltari cables. The moment I touched them, 1,000,000 volts of psychic history surged through my brain. I saw the burning moons, the ancient wars, the blood, and the tears. It was a tidal wave of grief that threatened to drown me. But I was a human. And if there's one thing humans are good at, it's living with a mess. You want a clean slate? I roared, my vision turning white. I'll give you a clean slate. But I'm the one who decides what gets written on it. I didn't try to pull the cables out. I did the opposite. I used my suit's interface to boost the signal. I opened the floodgates. But I didn't send the Kaltari's wipe command. I sent something else. I sent the feeling of the polish. The feeling of the mirror finish. The feeling of seeing yourself clearly for the first time without the shadows of the dead blocking the view. The warlord's eyes widened. What are you doing? You are stabilizing the frequency. You are giving them hope? No, I wheezed, my muscles locking up as the energy charred my suit. I'm giving them a choice. The air in the spire didn't just vibrate, it shattered. My human nervous system was never meant to act as a bridge for a psychic supernova, but the violet weave armor held me together. It acted like a filter, catching the raw, jagged edges of the Vor'shai's ancient trauma and smoothing them out, just as I had smoothed the dents in the metal. The Kaltari warlord screamed as the frequency shifted. He had prepared a delete command, a wave of nothingness. Instead, I was broadcasting a reflection. Every Vor'shai on the station and every warrior in the fleet outside suddenly saw themselves, not as the sum of their scars, but as the potential of their future. The Empress's eyes snapped open. The liquid silver was gone, replaced by a blinding, incandescent white. She looked at me through the storm, and for a split second, the telepathic link was so clear I could feel her heartbeat. The human does not erase, her voice echoed in the minds of everyone present. He reveals. With a final guttural roar, she surged upward. The parasitic Kaltari cables didn't just snap, they vaporized. The feedback loop reversed. The stolen energy didn't just return to the relic, it surged into the Kaltari ship latched to the spire. I saw the warlord's rusted armor begin to glow. Not with the beautiful violet of the Vor'shai, but with a frantic, unstable orange. The rust, the grime, the jagged scrap he called protection, it couldn't handle the clarity of the signal. In a civilization built on the glory of decay, the purity of the Shaper's light was a poison. System failure. The warlord shrieked, his limbs flailing as his suit began to melt off his body. The mirror. It's too bright. The harvester ship outside let out a structural groan that sounded like a dying god. It began to drift away, its hull plates buckling and peeling off like dead skin. On the deck of the Spire, the Kaltari boarding party collapsed, their minds unable to process a world where they weren't defined by what they had stolen. The energy vortex collapsed. I fell to my knees, the violet suit hissing as it powered down. My lungs burned, and my vision was a blur of static and shadow. I felt a hand on my shoulder, heavy, solid, and warm. I looked up. It was Val. Her armor was scorched, her face covered in soot, but her eyes were different. The weight of 1,000 years of mourning was gone. She looked at the Empress, then at the fallen warlord, and finally at me. "You didn't just save us, Silas," she whispered. "You ended the war. Not with a bomb, but with a rag." The Empress descended from the pedestal, the relic of the third moon now floating serenely behind her like a loyal pet. She stood over me, her presence no longer crushing, but oddly comforting. She looked at her hands, clean, shimmering, and free of the old, dark stains. "The Kaltari are retreating," she announced, her voice soft but carrying to every corner of the station. "Their ships are breaking apart. They cannot exist in the light of the unmarked." She turned to Krell, who was struggling to stand. The old Inquisitor looked at me, then bowed his head so low it touched the floor. "High Inquisitor," the Empress said. "The prophecy was wrong about one thing. The Shaper doesn't come to lead us into a new war. He comes to show us that we are already finished with the old one." She looked back at me, a strange, regal smile on her lips. "But Silas Thorne, I believe there is still a small matter of the receipt you hold." My heart skipped a beat. "I'm just a mechanic, Your Majesty. I don't want a reward. I just want a nap and maybe a workspace that stays clean for more than 5 minutes. "A nap?" she laughed. "No, the universe is a very messy place, Shaper. And it seems we have a lot more cleaning to do." The aftermath of the battle felt like the morning after a fever dream. The Deep Watch Vanguard was quiet, not the heavy, oppressive silence of an ancient tomb, but the fresh, expectant silence of a house with the windows finally thrown open. In the main hangar bay, the Vor'shai fleet didn't look like a collection of scarred warships anymore. Under the Empress's orders, every vessel had been put through the ultrasonic scrubbers. The fleet sparkled against the backdrop of the Orion Nebula, a shimmering wall of violet light that made the approaching Earth Alliance diplomatic ships look like rusty tugboats. I stood on the observation deck, my hands finally free of the violet weave armor. I was back in my old, grease-stained jumpsuit, holding a lukewarm cup of synthetic coffee. It felt grounded. It felt real. But when I looked in the glass of the viewport, I didn't see the same tired engineer I had been a week ago. "The Earth ambassadors are terrified," a voice said from behind me. I turned to see Val. She wasn't wearing her commander's plates. She was in a simple duty uniform, her skin glowing with a health I'd never noticed before. Terrified? Why? "We just saved the sector." "Because," Val smiled, leaning against the rail beside me, "they don't know how to talk to us anymore. They knew how to negotiate with the warriors of the Scar. They understood our blood debts and our anger. But a Vor'shai empire that is at peace with its own past? A Vor'shai that isn't looking for a fight to justify its existence. That's the most dangerous thing in the galaxy, Silas." She looked out at the sparkling stars. "And they know it's all because of one human who couldn't stand a dirty workbench. I just did what made sense." I shrugged, though I felt a lump in my throat. "The past is a heavy thing to carry, Val. Sometimes you just need to put it down so you can see where you're going." The Empress appeared then, not with a tray of guards, but alone. She didn't walk. She glided, the relic of the third moon, now a permanent floating companion, orbiting her like a tiny, loyal moon. She stopped in front of me and placed a hand on my chest, right over my heart. "Silas Thorne," she said, her voice a warm resonance in my mind. "The High Guard wanted to build a monument to you. They wanted to carve your face into the side of the third moon itself. Please tell me you said no," I pleaded. "I did," she chuckled. "A monument is just another thing that gathers dust and shadows. Instead, I have a different proposal. The Vor'shai are embarking on a journey to the inner rim. We are going to find the worlds we once broke and see if we can polish them. We need someone who knows how to find the beauty beneath the soot." She looked at me expectantly. "The Deep Watch Vanguard is no longer a station of war. It is now a forge of restoration. And every forge needs a master." I looked at Val, who gave me a subtle nod. I looked at the coffee in my hand, then out at the infinite, messy, beautiful galaxy waiting beyond the glass. I realized that my life as a simple station mechanic was over. I had accidentally scrubbed away my own old life too. "I'll need better solvents," I said, a grin finally breaking across my face. "And a lot more rags." The Empress smiled, and for the first time, the silver in her eyes looked like a sunrise. "We have all the time in the universe, Shaper." As the Deep Watch Vanguard turned its engines toward the stars, I knew one thing for sure: the galaxy would never be the same. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't our weapons or our technology. It was our refusal to let the past stay dirty. We are the ones who look at the darkness and decide it's time to clean. If you enjoyed this journey into the stars, make sure to like this video and share it with your fellow explorers. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want more tales of human spirit and galactic wonder, don't forget to subscribe to HFY Soundscape and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. What would you have done if you were in Silas's shoes? Would you have cleaned the armor or left the past alone? Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, keep your eyes on the stars and your workbench clean.